Hello everyone, I'm Wakka from Birds of Play, and in this video we're going to be taking an in-depth look at the character of Wakka from Final Fantasy X. So before you commit to the video, be aware that it will include some pretty major spoilers for Wakka's character and his part in the story of the game. As a character, Wakka has become somewhat controversial due to his indoctrination by the Church of Yevon and his less than savory opinions about the Al Bhed, which has led to some players having a hard time identifying with him or just plainly acknowledging him as one of the game's supposed heroes. If you're interested in an analysis where Wakka's racism is the focal point, then here's another video you might want to check out. But in this video, I hope to take a look beyond the surface level bigotry to reveal a character that is both compelling and relative to the overall plot. If you end up liking the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We have quite a bit of love for Final Fantasy X on this channel, and if you want to support the production of more Final Fantasy X content, let us know by leaving a comment, liking the video, or just, watching it. But without further ado, let's meet the man whose balls were blue. As a Final Fantasy character, Wakka's design is quite memorable, even though his orange hair spike isn't quite as iconic as, let's say, Cloud's yellow death trap from Final Fantasy VII. Wakka's weapon is also quite unique, even in the context of fantasy literature and gaming, his weapon of choice being a blitzball that he hurls at his enemies. It's a weapon that seemingly has some historic relevance within the world of Final Fantasy X, since High Summoner O'Halland also fought with a blitzball. That being said, it doesn't really seem to have caught on, as we don't see, for example, legions of crusaders charging Sin armed with their favorite sports equipment. As ridiculous as it might seem though, Blitzball is of course very central to Wakka's character, so it is somewhat fitting that he keeps it close at hand. Wakka is also notable for being the only main character whose theme is not featured in the game's original soundtrack. But even though Wakka's theme isn't featured in the game itself, it can be accessed in the Lucasphere Theatre. And in case you hadn't noticed, Wakka's theme is actually playing in the background right now. When we are first introduced to Wakka in the game, he is the first person to befriend Tidus after he washes up on Besaid Island, and the first person to truly welcome him into Spirit society by taking him in and teaching him how to behave. Wakka believing at this point that Tidus' memory has been compromised on account of him coming into contact with Sin. By this act of kindness, we come to know Wakka as a compassionate man, devoted to his community, although the cynically inclined of us might also claim that Wakka was perhaps partly motivated by Tidus' skills as a blitzball player. But even before Wakka crossed paths with Tidus, he had lived a life of his own. As we get to know Wakka, we start to become familiar with his backstory, and we learn that he once had a brother named Chappu, who was tragically killed fighting Sin in the service of the Crusaders. The ultimate insult to Wakka being that he did so fighting with an Al Bhed Machina weapon instead of the Sword Brotherhood, which Wakka later passed down to Tidus. This incident further cemented Wakka's disdain for the Al Bhed, adding personal injury to his dogmatic belief that the Al Bhed were to be considered heathens. We also learn that Wakka became a guardian to Father Zook prior to becoming Yuna's guardian, but that he couldn't devote himself completely to the pilgrimage since his mind kept wandering back to Blitzball, even though his team, the Besaid Aurochs, had actually never won an official game prior to the events of Final Fantasy X. If we're willing to consider secondary sources, there is even more to Wakka's backstory that might inform our interpretation of his character. In this case, I'm referring to a short story called Wakka's Story that can be found in the Final Fantasy X scenario Ultimania, which sheds more light on his childhood. As many others, Wakka and his brother Chappu were orphaned at a young age and taken in by the community, the kind-hearted and devout people of Besaid. As a result of this, Wakka came to revere the Church of Yevon, which not only saved him in his hour of need, but also his brother Chappu, who was only an infant at the time. Still, having a hole in his heart, however, Wakka turned to Blitzball and found something that was capable of washing away the fear and sorrow rooted deep in his heart, even if it was just for a moment. Eventually, Chappu also became a Blitzball player, getting Wakka even more invested in the sport. But when Chappu joined the Crusaders, resulting in his death, Wakka decided to retire from Blitzball in order to avenge him. As a further exploration of Wakka's character, Wakka's story partly serves to confirm certain details about his backstory, but it also gives us a more direct glimpse into his feelings and motivations, especially in regard to his fascination with Blitzball and his admiration for the Church of Yevon. Putting all of this together, a picture starts to emerge of a man who embodies the values of mainstream Spearan society, perhaps even to the extreme. A man who truly believes in the doctrines of Yevon for deeply personal reasons and is willing to atone for the sins of the past. Much like a large part of the population, Wakka also seeks refuge in the brief entertainment that Blitzball affords. But even then, it could be said that Wakka's relationship with the sport runs deeper than most. What stands out to me as well is that Wakka is someone who would have gladly stayed behind, only getting dragged and fighting sin due to the death of his brother and even his pilgrimage, and even then his mind kept returning home. Like the vast majority of the people of Spira, Wakka would never have undertaken a pilgrimage of his own accord, instead choosing to follow the teachings in the hope that one day they could abolish sin by living virtuous lives. As the personification of the everyday people of Spira, Wakka becomes an appropriate guide for Tidus and the player to enter Spearan society, in order to experience the dominant culture of the world. Tidus could very well have stayed with Riku, learning about Spira from the Al-Bhed, but that would have yielded a different experience, making Tidus an outsider among outsiders, on the fringes of a world that was already unfamiliar enough. But there is of course a darker underside to Wakka's character that is directly related to the facade of the Church of Yevon, his otherwise virtuous beliefs being rooted in falsehood. One of these beliefs being that the Al-Bhed race must be condemned for the use of machina, since it interferes with the world's atonement for the sins of the past. When all is said and done, however, Wakka's hatred for the Al-Bhed is ultimately rooted in ignorance, since he doesn't really know all that much about them. For example, Riku is able to join the group without Wakka protesting, since he, just like most Spearans, doesn't know that the Al-Bhed have spiral-shaped pupils. To Wakka's credit, however, the things he learns along the way start to dispel his racist ideology, leading him to ultimately accept the Al-Bhed and even apologize for his behavior. The moral of Wakka's character is therefore the overcoming of dogma and the necessity to look for one's own answers, even if it means challenging established principles. If we are to dismiss his character on account of his initial narrow-mindedness, we must do so at the risk of missing out on the lesson his character is otherwise intended to impart. To summarize briefly, Wakka is a reluctant hero who would just as well have stayed behind and counted his blessings if those around him hadn't put themselves in harm's way. But like many reluctant heroes, the journey ends up making him a better person, capable of making the world a better place. And as ridiculous as his weapon of choice might seem, his Blitzball serves as a physical reminder of where he comes from and where he might just as well have stayed given the choice. In a group of people determined to face sin one way or another, and that one guy was just along for the ride because he didn't know any better, Wakka's reluctance helps us to not take the pilgrimage for granted, and to truly appreciate the sacrifice of those who choose to take part in it. As players of Final Fantasy X, the pilgrimage might be the only Spearan reality we really know, but it must not be forgotten that to the everyday people of Spira, such as those that Wakka's character embodies, the pilgrimage represents an arduous and costly journey, only to be undertaken by the few. Thanks for watching. I hope you liked the video, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you did. What do you think of Wakka, and has your opinion changed at all? Also, please let me know what character you would like to see me analyze next. But until next time,